Firefighting has changed a lot in the past 113 years in Sale. Hi, it's Paul from Wicked Acorn. This is the Marsland building. Just down that way is the Little B. But before the Marsland building was here, this was the site of one of Sale's finest landmarks, the Big B, the Brooklands Hotel. People will tell you it's a shame they tore it down in 1972, exactly 100 years after it was built in 1872. It was such a beautiful building. They'll tell you that Laurel and Hardy once stayed here. And in 1893, the cotton industry signed the first meaningful agreement between employer and employee here. It was called the Brooklands Agreement. But perhaps the most important page in the history of the Brooklands Hotel was all but forgotten. It happened on the 5th of July, 1909. A fire such as this was the worst kind of fire. A multi-storied building with many rooms and an unknown number of possibly many people inside. But the Sale and Ashton-upon-Mersey Joint Fire Brigade had an ace up its sleeve. John Johnson Hunt, a decorated 30-year veteran of the Manchester Fire Brigade. He thought he might retire to somewhere like Sale, but after only 2 years, he was brought out of his retirement as the new superintendent of the Sale and Ashton-upon-Mersey Joint Fire Brigade in 1898. He had survived countless fires in Manchester, a place that one London architect and fellow of the Royal Society, Mr. Tite, once commented,
"If I was called upon as an architect to construct a building that was capable of burning down in the quickest and most effective manner, I would adopt the very principle of the Manchester warehouses."
Manchester was a tinderbox, waiting for a spark. All that oily machinery, the air filled with flammable cotton fibers, mountains of baled cotton stored in miles of warehouses. When buildings like these caught fire, it wasn't just about saving lives, it was about saving the city. John Johnson Hunt had stared down many fires like these in his 30-year career in Manchester. Compared to these, the Brooklands Hotel fire was, pardon the pun, run-of-the-mill. Not to downplay its seriousness, but they were ready for this. For the past 10 years in Sale, he'd made plans with his men as to how they would tackle a fire at the hotel if they were ever called there. But despite this training and preparation, tragedy was just around the corner. This is Geoffrey Price. He's the great-grandson of John Johnson Hunt. Geoffrey, you want to tell us a little bit about your great-grandfather?
Yes, he was chief engineer of Manchester Fire Brigade until he retired in 1890, and then took on the role of chief of Sale Fire Brigade in 1890, for which he served until he died in 1909. He's quite a brave man, really. When he was working in Manchester, he went into many a fire to rescue people, and indeed that happened in 1909 when there was a fire at Brooklands Hotel. He went in and the roof beam fell on him, and as a result of that, a week later he died of his injuries.
We've only just met our hero, and already we've lost him. Firefighting has always been one of the most dangerous jobs in the world. The loss of life is always a possibility, a risk that these brave men are willing to face every day. A sort of irony here. John Johnson Hunt had faced some of the worst fires in the world for 30 years in Manchester. Just a few months before the Brooklands Hotel fire, he was presented with a medal commemorating his 40-year fire brigade service. No doubt he was ready to pass the torch. Let's take a look back at his extraordinary life. So I'm in Rochdale. This is Fireground. It is What is it, Bob?
We're at Fireground, which is the Museum of Firefighting in Greater Manchester, and this is set up in an old 1933 fire station in the centre of Rochdale. So we tell the story of fires right back to the beginning of firefighting in this area.
And this is Bob Bonner. He's going to show us around a little bit and see if we can find some equipment that would have been contemporary to John Johnson Hunt. Let's take a look around.
Let's do that. Well, this is the typical steam fire engine of the time of the Sale and Ashton Fire Brigade. This is built by Shan Mason of London. It's quite a typical steam fire engine. This was almost the identical model to which was operated by Sale, and of course which the sort of fire engine John Hunt would be very familiar with. So it's horse-drawn, steam-powered, and requires a reliable source of water when it gets to the scene, because it didn't carry water like a modern fire engine. And then, of course, there's the time taken to build the steam up. So these engines could not work instantaneously like a modern fire appliance. And the normal trick would be to light the boiler just as you left the fire station and hope that by the time you reach the scene, you got enough steam pressure for it to work. Hence, they were not used for every single fire. Small fires were still extinguished with manual pumps or even small hand pumps. So the steam engine was for the more serious fires. The steam fire engine was quite a big, complicated bit of kit. You had to fire it up, you had to wait 30 minutes to get steam up, and then it would blast water on an average fire. It was too big for. They were for big fires. So for most small fires, they would either get a length of hose straight from a hydrant or just use a portable hand pump. Very much used by John Hunt in his Manchester days, sometimes known as a Tozer pump, because that was his big chief officer, Alfred Tozer, who invented these. So that will be carried on the back of most fire engines, and if they could get away with using that, they'd use that. It's the equivalent today of using a small hose reel for smaller fires, which the firemen do. You only get the big stuff out if it's big. This is known as a curricle escape. It's basically a rescue ladder mounted on wheels because of its great weight, and it fitted with a hose box. This was something that would be very familiar again to John Hunt in his Manchester days. These were dotted around the city in residential areas to provide an instant piece of life-saving equipment on the spot before the normal fire crews arrive from the nearest fire station. So this will be on a street corner with one fireman looking after it overnight. That would be called an outstation, and it could be instantly got to work, save a life perhaps before the other fire crews arrive. Again, a very typical system that John would know in city brigades. It reaches 60 feet high, which is extendable, 18 metres, constructed of wood of course. Never carried on the back of a fire engine, it's a freestanding piece of equipment.
Well, that's fantastic, Bob. Thank you very much. And Bob also has written several books, so if you want to have a look at those, hopefully I can put a link down below.
One of the books is called Manchester Fire Brigade, which was written in 1988. It tells the story of the City Fire Brigade. There are other books, and some of them are even available in the museum bookshop, would you believe?
There are other books at the Fireground in Rochdale. These scrapbooks were specially produced by the firm of Merriweather & Sons for firemen to hold their favorite cuttings. The Fire Service Museum in Rochdale is very fortunate to hold a number of such books, including that of Superintendent Alfred Tozer. But this one was owned by John Johnson Hunt and is held by his great-granddaughter, Brenda Edwardson. Over a century old, this valuable collection of cuttings gives a great first-hand account and fascinating insight into his 40-year fire service career in a way that cold, hard facts can't. The contents dating from the 1870s to his death in 1909 are a typical miscellany of newspaper stories, interviews with fire chiefs, cartoons, photographs, and poems. There are many newspaper articles recounting his daring rescues, falling from great heights, fighting fires single-handedly, men jumping into the medlock to avoid being burned to death. But perhaps one of the most thrilling stories is of an event that earned him the Quiver Heroes Medal in 1885. Hunt was at a fire in Portland Street, Manchester, when his attention was directed to a man at a window on the 6th floor of the building who was calling loudly for help. Hunt at once seized a lifeline and with an assistant passed through the adjoining warehouse and made his way onto the roof of the building on fire. He then climbed onto the parapet and lowered the line, but the dense smoke and the fierce heat made it a difficult matter to ascertain the exact position of the window at which the man in danger was standing. At last, however, Hunt was successful and felt the man grasp the line. He then made the rope fast to a chimney stack and with the aid of his assistant lowered the man within the reach of the fire escape, where he was received in a fainting condition and conveyed in safety to the ground. A feat like this involved great courage and coolness on Hunt's part, and we are proud to number him among the recipients of our medals. They even wrote a broadsheet song about the rescue. These broadsheet songs were often set to the tune of a popular song of the day. Perhaps some musicologist can figure out the tune so we can sing it once again. And the young man he saved, Oswald Raywood, lived to tell the tale. Did he go on to have children after this? Children and great-great-great-grandchildren by now. People that wouldn't exist but for the bravery of John Johnson Hunt. Firefighting in the late 19th and early 20th centuries bore little resemblance to today's firefighting, but you would certainly be able to identify it. Everybody knew the fireman by name, and the superintendent was a highly esteemed member of society. Having a fire brigade was something to be proud of. The Sale and Ashton-upon-Mersey Fire Brigade also provided support to the neighboring areas of Bagley, Northenden, and Carrington. John Johnson Hunt would turn our little volunteer fire department into what could truthfully be called as good an amateur fire service as could be found in the north of England. In 1873, the bell at St. Anne's Church was used to call the men to fires, but soon they would have their own, in a building that once stood where the town hall is. This is the bell from the original fire station that was behind the current town hall. Not a sound you really wanted to hear, but this is the bell that called them to the fire at the Brooklands Hotel. Exactly how Miss Wilson got the message from the Brooklands Hotel to the fire station is lost in time. Did they have a phone line between the hotel and the fire station? Even if they did, it's unlikely someone was there to answer at 6 in the evening. It wasn't manned 24/7 like today. Did she run to the Brooklands station and telegraph the Sale station? Or did she just run all the way from the hotel to the fire station? Either way, once there, then there was the onerous task of finding someone to ring the bell. Unlike today, the firemen wouldn't be at the station awaiting a call. They would most likely be going about their own business, probably just sitting down to tea. Upon hearing the bell, they would have to run all the way to the fire station. With all this in mind, nobody would be able to complain that the fire had not been given a fair chance to get going. The hotel staff, with the assistance of passers-by, did their best to attack the fire with buckets of water. But the flames had obtained a good hold, and soon the fire had engulfed 6 rooms and burnt through the roof and into the corridors below. The Sale and Ashton-upon-Mersey Joint Fire Brigade, under Superintendent Hunt, arrived at the scene and sprang into action. Hunt entered the building in his ordinary turnout cap. They'd been inside for about half an hour when Hunt asked fireman David Gandy to stand back so he could pass him along the corridor. Suddenly, and quite unexpectedly, a portion of the roof fell in, knocking Hunt down. and a second fall buried him. Second Officer Royal heard 2 falls of the roof, then a call for help. He looked along the corridor, but at first he couldn't see anything because of the thick smoke. He made his way along the corridor and found Superintendent Hunt completely buried in the debris, with just part of his face showing. He was released with some difficulty and immediately carried out of the building in a semi-conscious condition to a place of safety. He spoke to Second Officer Royal, and as if channeling Admiral Nelson, said, "Royal, you must attend to your duty and see that this work is properly done." First aid was administered, and he was sent home in a cab. Support was provided by Altrincham Fire Brigade. Their fire escape ladder was pushed by hand for part of the way and drawn for the remainder by a horse borrowed from a passing cab. Manchester Fire Brigade also sent a steamer, but this was not subsequently required. There the story of the Brooklands Hotel fire ends. But obviously, Officer Royal and his men saved the hotel, as it survived for another 63 years. John Johnson Hunt did not fare so well. Pneumonia induced by his injuries set in on Thursday. Sadly, he passed away 6 days later, on Sunday, the 11th of July, 1909.
The funeral started at the fire station, which was located at the back of what is now Sale Town Hall. The town hall wasn't actually built then. The town hall, as we know it, came into existence in 1914. In 1909, it was Oak House, a large house. The coffin was carried by the firemen along the length of Springfield Road. Reverend Reginald Walter Tatton Petch, the vicar of St. Paul, conducted the service. But not only him, there were quite a few of the clergy from around Sale joined, because it really was a very large civic occasion, and his death really did affect the whole community. Over in that direction was Cambridge Street. Cambridge Street is where John Johnson Hunt lived with his family. They lived at a very elegant semi-detached villa called Fernley. And there was actually a brass plaque on the gateposts alluding to his position as Superintendent of the Sale and Ashton-upon-Mersey Joint Fire Brigade. That just gives you a flavour that it really was a community greatly disturbed by the death. We know that all the neighbours in the houses on Cambridge Street attended the service, as did most of the residents of Sale, lined the route of course, and the newspaper accounts give great details of how deeply lined the streets were, and the photograph is captured at the very moment that the flag is being placed on the coffin. And from here the coffin was taken by the carriage to Sale and Brooklands Cemetery. It went all the way along Sibson Road and up Washway Road to Marslands Road, and from there to the cemetery, and that entire route was lined 6 or 7 deep, the whole route, with members of the community paying their respects to Superintendent Hunt.
This would have been one of the worst times for there to be a fire anywhere outside of Sale. His funeral and the route to the cemetery was lined with many of the firefighters of what we would now call Greater Manchester.
Here we are at the graveside of John Johnson Hunt, and you will note that his helmet is pointing towards what was the site of the Brooklands Hotel where the fire was in 1909, which is interesting. It's only a few hundred yards away, and the helmet is pointing towards the hotel. This is a family set of graves. John Johnson Hunt and his wife are buried here, but also John Johnson Hunt's brother, who was also a fireman, is buried here as well, along with John Johnson's daughter.
Gone but not forgotten. Preparations are underway for the unveiling of a red plaque for John Johnson Hunt. The Red Plaque scheme introduced by the Fire Brigades Union in 2017 is similar to the English Heritage Blue Plaque scheme. It's intended to create memorials specifically for firefighters who have lost their lives in the line of duty. Special thanks to Anthony Ciaramella. Tony was instrumental in arranging this fitting memorial to this hero of Sale and Ashton-on-Mersey, and indeed all of Greater Manchester. The plaque will be unveiled at the Marsland building where the Brooklands Hotel once stood on the 28th of October, and hopefully you can find the link above and in the description of this video to the ceremony.